You have desired outcomes and intentions. You have things that you desire in the future that you currently don't have. And just about all of those require the compliance, so to speak, of other people. You need and want other people to do stuff that you want them to do to achieve the outcomes that you desire to have. And what's at the heart of that happening is this idea of who you're being when you're with them, how you show up with them.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Keeping It Real Estate. I have an extremely special guest with us today. He's an expert in leadership and one of the most unique individuals I've ever met. With that said, Marc, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It's great to be here. By the way, what do you mean by unique?
Unique in the sense of clarity on life and clarity in leadership. So that's why I'm excited to bring you to our listeners and talk a little bit about, what we've been working on. So little background, Marc and I have been working together for about the last 9 months or so, and it's purely just leadership, and it hits all walks of life. I went and was looking for more leadership in the sense of really family first, and it's applied to my business and my friendship, and it's hit every part of my life. And so that's where I thought, let's bring Marc to you guys and bring as much value as we can. Maybe you're struggling with a business decision. Maybe you've got some challenges at home. Maybe it's a relationship. And this episode may spark something for you that, helps you either find a way or look to further develop your leadership skills. So that's really the goal of the call. So Marc, the way I kind of wanted to kick it off is, you work for a company called Ontocore. And when I first went to your guys' course and heard that, you had a term that was kind of the beginning of it, was epistemology versus ontology. And they sound kind of complex, but I just want to see if you could break that down for our listeners so they understand the difference of what that is, and then we can, navigate from there.
Yeah, that's great. So Ontocore is a leadership and performance coaching firm, and we work with high performers in just about any industry you could think of, and all different size organizations, from large to medium to small, and even solopreneurs. And traditional executive coaching is, I would say, founded in strategy. So you're at point A and you want to get to point B, and there's things to be done in order to accomplish that. And I would acknowledge that that's certainly important. Strategy is absolutely important. And that's just not where we focus. And while we can certainly be about, and we are about, strategy with certain clients, depending on their needs and the timing, our focus is around a different domain. And that would be who the person, the individual, is showing up as a leader in all of their relationships. And so we make this distinction: epistemology versus ontology. And epistemology is the study of knowledge, a philosophical study of knowledge. And most executive coaching would live in that domain. It's facts, it's data, it's steps, it's strategy. So that all lives in the epistemological domain. And that is distinct from ontology. Ontology is the study of being, who you're being. And we've discovered, and I say we, our firm, founder is my partner, Brandon Craig, and we have other coaches in the firm and other team members. And what we have discovered, and we've been at this now for, I've personally been coaching in this domain for 13 years, and Brandon's even longer, probably 17 or 18. And what we have discovered in working with leaders who want to accomplish outcomes is that the most important elements, the most impactful elements on creating outcomes is the way that an individual shows up and who they are being in all of their relationships and all of their interactions and all of the situations that life and their business demands of them. Who they're being is much more impactful than the strategies that they employ. Because if you think about it, Dan, you want to go from point A to point B. And let's just say, you guys are running a very successful real estate investing and management firm. And I think I recall you've got something like $350 million worth of assets that you're working with, and you want to go to $1 billion. Well, the way to get to $1 billion, there's a lot of ways. And you know that. There's dozens of different strategies of how you can grow the firm and the business to get to $1 billion. And as I see it, and as I've experienced it, what matters most is how effective are you being when you employ and deploy that strategy. So if like you could have the best laid plans and strategy in the world, but if who you're being is ineffective, it doesn't matter. You're not going to go very far. And so our firm in the domain of ontology, who you're being, we focus there. And that is really about performing, how to perform at a very, very high level. So yeah, does that help to bring some clarity to the distinction?
Yeah, I appreciate that. One example I've seen on a day-to-day basis for us and any other owners out there is, as I'm sitting with my team members, if I can be more tuned into what the outcome is I'm looking to create, I know how to be with that person, which has really helped transform some of these conversations that can be considered like hot topics or sensitive subjects. And the value I've come to realize with my way of being is I can talk about almost anything, and we can get to the point that doesn't, discourage and pull people out of the game, if you will, where, some of these conversations can be hard. They're hard conversations, but if we're tuned in to how we're being with these people, we've had a much better chance and have better results of producing the outcome we're looking to create. And, that's in anything in life. That's been in business, that's been with the family. And it's something that is so interesting because I've never heard of this concept until just a few months ago. Yeah. And it's so powerful because it's ongoing, right, Mark? I mean, it's all the time. It's everywhere. It's right now. It's never not happening.
That's right. If you're awake, meaning you're not sleeping in your bed and your body's not in a sleep state, you have a way of being, and that way of being has an impact outside of you on other people. And that impact, and this is a broad generalization, but that impact typically does one of two things. It either attracts people and it creates an environment where they're drawn to you, or it repels people and it creates an environment that has separation occur. And I'll offer an example that you've shared with me, and I'll take a small liberty here. I have the sense it's going to be just fine that I've shared this. Your investors know this about you. You're a very competitive person, and you are a performer. If anybody knows about your former snowboarding background, they'll know that you are a competitive person and you are a performer. Like, you are one of the top snowboarders in the world. And you've brought that into your investing, and it serves you and the investors who work with you so well because you're so meticulous and diligent in all that you do. And you've got this team inside your business, inside Granite Towers. And what I recall is that there were times before the leadership training that you've done with us where you'd be with team members and you'd be heated with them. And that could look like, maybe your tone is heavy, or you've raised your voice, or the person doesn't think that there's space to give really transparent feedback or share ideas that might be different from yours. And as you've shifted your way of being in being with team members to be more even with them, like what I've recall you telling me is like, you're getting more out of them. You're getting more ideas out of them. You're getting people more, being more self-accountable to their own performance. You're getting people who will give you feedback when you need the straight, direct feedback. And like any good leader who's what I would say awake or conscious, so to speak, they would want that. They would want to know if they're behaving in a way that is useful or not useful. And you've done an incredible job of learning that and applying that. So that's a simple example, but I love it because look, anybody listening to this, you have desired outcomes and intentions. You have things that you desire in the future that you currently don't have. And just about all of those require the compliance, so to speak, of other people. You need and want other people to do stuff that you want them to do to achieve the outcomes that you desire to have. And what's at the heart of that happening is this idea of who you're being when you're with them, how you show up with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful. And, just this weekend, I'm looking back at being here with my kids, and I have very clearly noticed that when I show up on a Saturday morning and I'm being loved and being a connected father, that the performance for my children on the chores on Saturday is much more efficient. Where if I get up and I'm more of like putting the orders in and demanding, and I'm kind of short, and I'm not being a connected dad with these children, it's much more difficult for me to get performance out of my children. So, and it doesn't have to necessarily always be performance. It could just be connecting with people, but it's drastic how much different and how much more effective I can be as a father with this one concept. And it takes time. It takes practice. I'm making mistakes often, and you can course correct and keep going. One thing you talk about, Mark, is creation's a process. Another concept I never heard before. Like as we're going through these meetings at Granite Towers or with on-site team members with my kids, errors can be made, and it's okay. You've done what you've done. Let's course correct and head down that. Do you want to talk on that a little bit about just creation's a process and just kind of what comes to your mind with that?
Yeah. That's a great question. So let me zoom out of that question for just a moment, and then I'll zoom right back in. I think it's important for people listening to understand how we at Ontocore would define leadership. So leadership is creating a new future, one that wasn't going to happen. And in the process, you're fulfilling on or attempting to fulfill on the needs of all relevant parties. So just to break that down for a moment. So creating a new future, one that wasn't going to happen, means that had you not brought leadership to it, what you're currently getting is the likely future. You keep getting what you've already gotten. Whereas with leadership, something new gets created because of your being a leader in it. And in that process, you're attempting to fulfill on the needs of all the relevant parties, meaning you don't get to where you're going based on there being a cost for yourself or others. Like you attempt to minimize or eliminate all costs associated, meaning, and I'm not talking about financial cost, although it could be that. What I mean is your gain and accomplishment doesn't come at the expense of somebody else. So having said that, if we now zoom back into creation as a process, you want to create something, there's an outcome that you or person desires, recognizing that almost always that happens over time as a process. And I think what's really useful to recognize in this, and if we're just talking about human beings, is as a human being, a person has been being, thinking, and behaving the way they've been being, thinking, and behaving their entire life. We're talking about adults, decades. And oftentimes we want something to change in that person, right? And there's a part of us that would desire that to happen like that. And we desire instant gratification. And it's just unrealistic. If you want somebody to change a behavior that has been repeated over and over and over again, tens, dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of times over many, many years, it's just not realistic that would necessarily happen right away. And it's quite possible that it can happen quickly. And that is less about the person and the fact that it can happen really quickly, and more about who you're being as a leader in the way that you are with that person, and the way that you speak to that person, the way you behave with that person, that would have them compelled and inspired to change their behavior. It's a great example is just that you use with your kids. It's like, we can use force by raising our voice or, physical force to get compliance out of our kids. But at what cost? At the cost likely of your whole future relationship. Like that works for a little bit of time while they're younger and starting to get older. But once they reach teenhood and beyond, it's like, dude, it's like you risk your whole relationship because of resentment they have about the way that you showed up with them. And if you want them to do something like, clean their rooms every week, well, the way you show up to them and who you're being with them over time is going to produce that outcome or give you a greater advantage of producing that outcome. And what I'm saying is that can happen really quickly based on how effective you're being with them. So yeah, creation is a process, and it's useful to see that for other people. And it's also useful to see that in yourself. It's like, yeah, it just takes some time, oftentimes, to change who you are because you've been being and behaving a certain way for so many years.
Yeah, I think about, just going back to, let's go to the example of the kids here. So my son really is into PS5 lately. He loves Madden and he loves a couple of the other games. And gosh, I'm not a big fan of video games. I never have been. And I've seen video games affect other people from my perspective as they've grown up, nieces, nephews, as they gotten older, and my brother, and whatever it may be. And so let's just say I'm wanting to create what I think is a healthier lifestyle for my son. What would be some things, Mark, as a way of being that you would say, hey, Dan, maybe consider these things to make an impact on how he sees them versus me just, putting the PS5 in my gun safe and not letting him have the thing. Do you have anything that comes to your mind, that when you hear that of, yeah, you know what, maybe consider X?
Yeah, well, for starters, one way of being would be curiosity, like you being curious with your son as to what has him so attracted to and excited or enthralled about video games. It's like, what is that? What has him be so interested in it? And somebody listening could think that that's obvious, but I would caution you that a really valuable thing to consider is that you assuming what is in the mind of somebody else is a big risk. And if we just take this example of video games, I mean, I played video games growing up, and I have kids and they don't play video games. So like, why is that? If mine don't and yours do, that's got nothing to do with you or me, by the way. What I'm saying is, like, there's a difference there. So people are unique. And so let's not assume that we know the answer. And like, one of the most valuable things I've ever heard my partner, Brandon, teach is something he said, I heard him say a long time ago when I first met him, and that is that having the answer gives you access to nothing. And I didn't understand that for quite some time. But if you just think about that for a moment, what it means is you go into a situation assuming something or already having the answer, already knowing, and it's like whatever someone says over there is just gonna like move right past you. And they might say something or do something that could give you some insight that's really valuable context that can help you be a more effective with them in the future based on the outcome that you want to produce, but you'll miss it every time because you've already assumed, you already know, you already got the answer. And it's like, man, that's so dangerous. So being curious and being open to discovering something that you don't already know as a possibility is really, really valuable. One of the things that I've discovered that's effective with other human beings is discovering context. Like if you want to go from point A to point B and that involves somebody else, the only thing that's standing in the way is context that you don't know or understand about that other person. You want to go from point A to point B, and that outcome is contingent upon another person's behavior, being a certain way or doing certain things. The only thing standing in the way is context. And as effective leaders, being an effective leader would be somebody who's being curious, being open, being committed to discovering what that person is thinking, or what are the factors at play for that person that might be standing in the way of the thing that you want them to do. So back to your example, conversations, and hear that, plural, conversations, plural, not just one, but on multiple occasions, discovering why the PS5 and the video games are so fun or so valuable. And, what's the payoff? What are they getting out of it that is, pulling them back to it? And like getting a sense of what their experience is like in both a useful and healthy way, and maybe a non-useful and non-healthy way. Like, hey, if I were to go put the PS5 in the safe for 2 months, like what would that be like for you? Like the answer to that question would be really insightful, like for you as a dad, right? Like if the answer is, well, man, I wouldn't want that. I enjoy playing. I have fun with it, but I go find other things to do. It's like, oh, okay, great. Or if it would be like, man, they throw a fit and it's like all of a sudden they get this emotional hijack and they're like having a tantrum over it, like going nuts. Woo, well, that tells you something else. Context. So, yeah, those are some ways of being in this particular example that could be really useful, that would begin to have you co-create. And I say co-create like with your son collaboratively, a really healthy relationship, in this case with video games.
Gosh, it's so powerful, and it's so really simple. I love, when I get around folks that can break what I think are complex things down and make them simple, I gravitate towards those people. And, it has to make sense to me. There has to be something where I'm like, gosh, I could see that. And when, you're sitting here talking, Mark, about going and discovering what it's really like for him, and I have the idea in my head. I just think I know, I'm like, I already know what it's like, but really, do I really know? No, I don't really know for sure. So, having that conversation with Z and, getting clear on that and asking the question of how would that be if I put the PS5 in the safe for a couple months, and just hearing what he has to say, I at least would know a lot more than I know today to see if we can find a way to navigate what seems complex.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. And I had a thought, Dan, and it moved past me. So we'll see if it comes back.
Okay, good. So when I first met Brandon, he came on and he was talking about ways of being. And we've been talking a lot about that so far. And there's specifically 7 that you guys teach at your Create Powerful course, which is a phenomenal course. I advise anybody who's looking to further enhance their leadership skills, go check it out. It will be worth every penny times 10 or 100, depending on how much you apply the work. But in that, there's just some gems. And I just wanted to see, we don't have time to go through all 7, and it's not necessarily what this podcast is about, but of the 7, what would be 1 or 2 of your favorites, Mark, that we could talk a little bit about to help our listeners use them and to start to apply some leadership in their lives today?
Yeah. And just to be clear about that for those listening in, when we created the Create Powerful course curriculum, and we teach this concept called Who You're Being, Your Way of Being, we've identified 7 fundamental foundational ways of being that, when they are present, create the greatest advantage and opportunity to be more effective with human beings and create the outcomes you want with the greatest amount of speed and the least amount of cost. So, I mean, man, Dan, we could spend the whole time just talking about any one of these. So the one that comes to mind that it's just what comes to mind is the idea of being integral. And so we spend a lot of time in our work with our clients teaching integrity, and integrity in a unique way. So many people would collapse or define integrity as some matter of morality or ethical and or right or wrong or something like that. And that's fine. That's fine if that's your definition. In our work, we define integrity simply as a matter of a person's word, and nothing more than that and nothing less than that. And so what that means further is that every time you open your mouth and you speak to someone, you are putting your word on the line. You are saying things in your language, and that person or group of people are receiving your language, are receiving your words, and they're starting to have their own understanding of what it is you said, what it means, what it meant, and what the impact is on them. And so we've discovered that when human beings can be integral or are being integral, that anything is possible, any creation is possible. And when a person is not being integral and their word cannot be counted on, that it removes all possibility of creation happening over a long period of time. You might get something quick or short term, but not something that's going to last. And so what's interesting about this concept is that as we teach it and people begin to understand it, Dan, and you know this, is a person begins to recognize that the language that they use can be really loose or sloppy. And another one of these 7 elements is language, and there's some overlap with integrity. But language, the way that we define language is it's the fundamental foundation for creation. And so if you think about that, and I'm going to come back to integrity in just a moment here, but if you think about language being defined as the fundamental foundation for all creation, just move that around your brain for a second, anybody listening, and we could look at anything. So language lives in your mind, right? We talk to ourselves. We have thoughts that come into our mind, and that's made up of words. That's language. And then, of course, there's what comes out of our mouth. That's language. And then there's our body language, and our actions are just a reflection of the language that was once in our mind that may have came out of our mouth. So all of that is language. And if you think about anything that you have ever created or that's ever been created, it started in language. Like you think about your relationship with your wife, Melissa. Like at one point you guys met and you thought language, oh yeah, she's really attractive or she's really cool. And then maybe at some point you asked her out. It's like, and then you maybe had the thought, boy, I'd really like to be in a relationship with this person. Then you declare that, or you invited her into that. And then like you behaved in certain ways that attracted her to you. Like all of that is language. That relationship was created because of language. You think about money that gets produced based on performing a service, language. You think about the chair you're sitting in right now. Like at some point, some person thought about possibility of creating this thing that somehow we language a chair. Like it started in somebody's mind, and then they started to speak it out and created a manufacturing process. And, next thing you know, we've got chairs. But all language, all creation is rooted in language. And so if you think about that, man, like if that's true, and if you're listening, just try on that it could be true. And if you don't think it is, that's fine. You could leave it when this call's over. But if it were true that all creation is constituted in language, man, you ought to be really, really, really vigilant about what comes out of your mouth. And most people, we're not taught this. Most people are not. People tend to be loose with their language, and it has an impact, back to integrity now, on their integrity. And what that means is you are either in integrity or you're out of integrity. You've either done what you said you would do by when you said you'd have it done by, or if circumstances changed, you communicated that in a timely fashion, and then you've reconfigured whatever you said you would do, or you've not done it. And if you have, it's like you have integrity in that moment. If you've not, you're not integrity. And it's like, how could something work if you keep moving throughout your day and your life, making all kinds of statements and declarations and saying things about what people can count on you for, and then you don't go follow through on those? And if you're listening, that might sound obvious. And if it does, that's great, because that means, you're somebody that has some relationship with performance. And I would say to you that look in the nuanced places. Are you the type of person who says you'll be somewhere at a certain time and you show up a minute or two late and you brush it off like, that's no big deal? And look, I'm not suggesting it has to be a big deal, but when you do that, you teach a person something about you. It's like, I'll be here at 11 a.m. to start this podcast. I'll be here at 11 a.m. Not at 11:01. 11:01 is, you can't count on me to be here at 11. And if you were to take that kind of precision with your word and applied it across the board, it would have a profound impact on all of your relationships. And if you're listening, you'll just have to grant me some trust or some faith on that.
Well, I can say with our team members, we have a team member and she is on time every time. And it's powerful for me because I just know she'll be there. And so I think one thing that ends up coming to fruition is that when you keep your word, that trust goes up and you can move so much more efficiently. And I think we can all relate to this. You make an agreement with someone, they don't follow through. Like, how quickly can you build a business? You can't rely on your team members. If they tell you you're going to do something, then they don't do it. It's not long and either the relationship falls apart. And, I'm going back to when we first were going through a course, Mark, there was an article about a car being in integrity. And if a car is in integrity, it works and it rolls down the road. And if it doesn't, the tire's flat. And it was an interesting concept to put in my mind of saying, hey, I'm like a car, I'm a vehicle moving through life. If I have higher levels of integrity, and you guys go to a deep level of integrity in the course, 6 or 7 different parts of integrity, some parts I'd never heard of. And you start to apply that and it makes you much more efficient, much more effective. And people, I think, can just rely on you and count on you to be your word. And so that's been huge for me.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great analogy too. Like every part of a vehicle, you think of how many parts are in a vehicle for the thing to work, and then for it to work really well, which we would begin to define as performance. You've got workability, which, it works. And then you've got performance, like it works outstanding or exceptionally well. And there's some cars that freaking perform, right? You get in it, you put it into gear, it works flawlessly, it just purrs. You tap the gas, the thing responds. It's like you adjust the steering like a fraction of an inch, and it's like you feel the vehicle moving in that direction. Performance. You likely have been in a vehicle where you could turn the wheel like 2 or 3 or 4 inches and it barely starts to go in that direction. It works, but it's not performance. And so if any part of a vehicle breaks down, it's going to lead to the thing not working, and it's certainly going to lead to non-performance. And the same is true with us. And one of the greatest ways, or let me say that differently, one of the most impactful elements that make us up in order to work well is our language. We create with our language. And if we're loose and sloppy or have breakdown in our word, in our language, guess what? We are not going to work or perform very well.
How do folks become more efficient with their language? You want, like you just said, you want to create it, speak it, right? And I think I had a note in my mind where it said the universe doesn't know the difference. It's impartial, whether it's created or spoken. It's unknown. It's blurred. So what if someone wants to become more effective with their language? I could hear listeners right now being like, that's great. What do I do? What are some steps I take?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I want to give an answer that people can really grab onto. And the first thought that came to my mind is it requires awareness and attentiveness. And So here's something that people could grab onto. I suggest that at times to my clients that there's 4 words that I want you to be really, really vigilant about, and look to exercise them out of your vocabulary. And those 4 words are should, hope, but, and try. And you could just pick one of those, and think about the word try for a moment. If you say to a team member, Dan, hey, there's an important meeting I desire for you to be a part of, and it's going to start at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So I know you don't usually come in till 9, and it would make a big difference for me if you'd be willing to come in and at 8. And they say to you, oh, okay, 8 o'clock. Yeah. I think I could do that. I'll try to be there. I'll try to be there for 8. And you juxtapose that with, oh, 8 o'clock tomorrow? Great, you could count on it. You have my commitment. I'll be there at 8. It's like you get a different sense of what you could count on. And more importantly, for that person, when that person says, when the language that comes out of their mouth is, I'll try to be there at 8, it has a built-in back door. It's like, okay, how much effort are they going to actually put forward? Maybe a little bit. However, when they use the language, I'm committed to being there at 8, I will be there at 8. It's like they will do whatever is necessary, maximum effort required to be there at 8. Like, that's a huge distinction in performance. Imagine that was going on in all domains of how a person showed up in their work. Like, people listening, likely are leaders of businesses and companies, and imagine all of your team members took that kind of an approach with everything that they did in their responsibilities. Like, freaking performance would be off the charts. So back to language, it requires awareness. And human beings, like, look, the way that we are designed, like literally the way that we are designed in our bodies and in our brains, is that we operate really well based on pattern because it's predictable and because it uses the least amount of energy. So the brain seeks out patterns. And so what ends up happening is we become what I call pattern producing machines, because that's actually how we are designed as human beings. However, it puts us to sleep. It has us often become in this sort of hypnotic rhythm of the way that we do things, the way that we talk, the way that we show up and be in our relationships, the way that we, eat, the way that we drive. All of that becomes pattern. And what I'm suggesting is to be awake to your language, is to disrupt your pattern. And when you begin to do that, you become sharper in what comes out of your mouth. You become more responsible for what you say. You become, as a result of that, you are your word. You're more integral more often. And all of a sudden, man, your performance just starts to uptick. And so that's just one suggestion of how a person can take what we're talking about and actually put it into practice.
Man, I love that. And one thing that comes to my mind, you guys, as you're listening, is in the beginning we were talking about how you're being with people, and you start putting that with language. Like, I'm more effective with my language when I sit down with my team member and I'm being a team member and I'm being supportive than being angry with them. My language is going to change drastically. So you start putting some of these concepts together, and it really exponentially moves the needle from my perspective of creating performance, creating an outcome. And so keep that in mind with language as well, of where are you coming from? How are you feeling inside? And what's your outcome you're looking to create there?
Yeah, I think that's a great contribution. So remember the thing that I said earlier that it went past me and I couldn't remember it? I thought of it. And so I'll bring it up now. I think it's relevant.
Yeah.
So one of the elements of leadership that we teach is a specialized term called agreements. And you know this, Dan. You have adopted this term and the use of this way of being with other human beings to produce more accountability and performance in all of your relationships. And so an agreement, and I'll just use a plain sort of lay definition, if you will, here, is a co-created promise that has each person know what they can count on from the other. It's a informal definition of an agreement. And we're talking about ways of being. And earlier in our conversation, we're talking about you being with your son, and we talked about being curious and being open. And there's something really critical in the definition of an agreement. And that is the word in co-create. And so what we discover as we coach people and leaders is that they have things that they need the people in their businesses and their lives to do in order to produce the outcomes that they desire. And so they'd be in a conversation. A leader will be in a conversation, and they'll get to the end of the conversation, and the leader will say something like, "So you're going to go do this, and I'm going to go do that." Like, okay, great. And there's some usefulness in that, but not what it could be if it was in the form of an agreement. And so when I say to you, Dan, okay, we've identified some things that are important for you to go do and for me to go do. Now, you and I create an agreement around those things. So I say the word agreement as a specialized term, and I'm bringing myself to it. Whom I'm being is sincere. I'm being intentional. And all of a sudden, like, you go from leaving that meeting, like, with your mind on the next thing you're going to go do, to you're a little more attentive. It's like, oh, okay, we've talked about what we're going to do. Now I'm saying we're going to enter into an agreement together. It's like, okay, so here's what the agreement's going to look like. What you've declared that I could count on is you're going to do this. Here's what it looks like. Here's when it'll be done by. Here's how I'll know it when it's complete. Here's what the impact is when the thing's been done and accomplished effectively. Here are the consequences of what would happen if it didn't happen and the impact, et cetera. And then we take those detailed notes, and then those notes get emailed to you to ensure that you're clear about it. And you say, yep, this is exactly what you could count on. The probability of the thing that you said you'd go do just went way up, because we entered into a specialized term called an agreement that has you show up more accountable because of it. And that is an example of using language with a way of being powerfully to produce an outcome, and having the outcome be more consistent with what you desired it to be and how you envisioned it to be, having it happen overall, and having it happen sooner rather than later.
And what I love about this stuff so much, and Mark, if you were still going, continue, don't lose your thought. What I love about it so much is that you can create anything. There's nothing that can't be created. If you have some of these basic understandings, I mean, they're not basic to the common folk, to most people, but once you start talking about it, like agreements, it's a pretty basic thing. Yeah, and there's more to it than probably most people put together. Once you have that all put together, you can create anything. And it's a freeing feeling, and I love it.
Yeah, well, that's a great word for it. In my mind, it does create freedom. And one more thought on what we just said, and we can look at anything else that you desire today, is I put some emphasis on the word co-create. So an agreement, as an informal definition, is a co-created promise that has each party know what they can count on from one another. And the reason why the co is so important is because each person in the agreement takes full responsibility for what they're agreeing to. It's not like a boss to an employee saying, hey, I want you to go do this. And the person is like lower on the hierarchy, so to speak. And so, they're going to go do it just because their boss told them to. No, they're going to go do it because they've given their word to it, and they see the value in it, and they understand the impact it's going to have. And in terms of co-creating, they've actually looked into their life, into their calendar, into their day, their time, and they've actually thought about how they're going to go make this thing happen. And then they've responded. In a traditional employer-employee relationship, I see this a lot. The employer says, hey, I need you to go do this, or some version of that. The person says, okay, because they're the employee, and that's what employees do. They do what their boss tells them to do. And they just say, okay, because that's what they think they're supposed to do, without actually ever looking and understanding what is the impact and what's going to be required to go do it. And consequently, oftentimes the thing either doesn't get done, it gets done sloppily, or it gets done perfectly, but other responsibilities that they had get compromised. And so it came at a cost. And so co-creating would look like you and I have an agreement, and you're clear about the thing, and you actually go look and say, yeah, I could go do that, and I could have it done by this. But in order to do that, it's going to impact this other thing that I'm working on. And that's time sensitive. I'm not sure how I can do both. That's really good for me to know. Yeah, because then we'll collaboratively talk about how we can have both happen. If we're running a business, we don't want one outcome and accomplishment to come at the expense or the cost of something else. No, we want everything to happen. So how do we go do that? In an agreement that's effectively co-created using accurate language and people giving their word, man, it's powerful.
Yeah. Wow. You guys, I hope you're getting a taste of just some of the reasons why I said Mark is unique. I hope you're picking up some of this stuff. We're almost 52 minutes in already. Time is flying by here. Mark, what would be the best way you would advise for our listeners if they're liking what they're hearing, they want to learn more, they want to go deeper, they want to become more effective leaders in their business, family, wherever it may be in life? What would you say is the most effective way to work on those skills?
Well, for starters, a person could go back and re-listen to this. There's a lot that we talked about in here. We looked at some very specific elements of leadership that we teach. And, leadership isn't unlike anything else that a person would want to go learn to do. It's practice. It's what we call seat time. It's repetition. And so I think you ought to go back and re-listen to this, because we looked at some key elements and examples inside our conversation today. And the reality is there's what you know about leadership. There's what you don't know about leadership. And then there's what you don't know. And there's a lot that can live in those domains. And so keep seeking. don't have the answer, keep seeking. And of course, one place you could go seek is you could go to ontocore.com. That's ontocore.com. You could go to our website and you could look at some of the stuff that we do, that we have there, and look at participating in the leadership course that we put on, and there's lots of other teachers teaching about leadership. So don't have the answer, go seek and go learn, and there's a lot of ways you could go do that.
Yeah, and you guys, I can tell you right now, we're scratching the tip of the iceberg of the last 9 months of what we've gone through. There's so much great content, and Ontocore has been amazing for us. I'm just grateful to be a part of what you guys do, and looking forward to the future of what we can co-create. It's been fun. So
yeah, can I say one more thing?
Yeah, please.
The thing I want to say is about you, Dan. You and I have had a relationship now for about a year and a half or so. That's how long we've known each other. And what I want to express to those that are listening is that in the spirit of what we're talking about, this concept of who one's being, I am very, very judicious and conservative about what I do with my resources and where I put them and where I invest them. And I just think it's relevant to have those that are listening know that I've placed an investment in Granite Towers. And I promise you it's got very little to do with the numbers and the potential return, and has almost everything to do with who you've been, who you're being, and have been with me as a person that I believe I can count on. And it's because of that I'm attracted to you. And look, I get people putting opportunities in front of me all the time, and 99% of them I don't do anything with. But I did with you and Granite Towers largely because of who you are. And so I just want to acknowledge that I see you as a guy who's sincere about performing and being integral and producing value and outcomes, and I appreciate you for that.
Well, appreciate that compliment there, Mark. It means a lot indeed, and that goes for everybody. There's a lot of choices, a lot of places you can put your capital, and finding the right deals, the right operators it's not easy. And so I appreciate that so much, and it means a lot to us. And again, thank you so much for coming on. I love this stuff. It gets me excited, because there's further and further levels you can go, and it puts it all on you. The opportunity is in you. And that's the part that I like most, is, things that I can control, things that I can affect, and it starts and ends right here with me. And so the further I can take my leadership and bring it to other folks, the more fun life is, and the more passion I'm feeling. So yeah. I appreciate you coming on, Marc.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. We'll do it again in the future.
That's great. Thank you all for listening. If you want to learn more about what we do at Granite Towers Equity Group, please reach out to us at granitetowersequitygroup.com. Contact us button, and we'll get back with you real soon. Thanks for listening, you guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Marc.